Welcome back for another book review. I'm ahead of the curve, and in this review I will be discussing Fyodor Dostoyevsky's Notes from the Underground, which was written in 1964. So out of popular demand, I'm back with another piece by Dostoyevsky. Now, I've actually read this book before, about 2 years ago now, and because you guys seem to like my other two Dostoyevsky reviews, that being of which Demons and White Knights, which if you haven't already seen those, then I do encourage you to do so. But yeah, I thought I'd reread this very short book and give you my thoughts on it, because as I said, a few of you have seen my other reviews and asked if I'm going to do more Dostoyevsky reviews, and I thought, well, why not? It's a good time to do it. I've been a bit busy with like an essay from university and so on, so it's not too long. And admittedly, I did read about a good 100 pages last night just to try and get this review to you guys on time, but I didn't rush it to the extent of not taking in the content, I'll assure you of that, because as you'll see, I have quite a lot to say about this small piece of existential fiction. So as I've done in the past couple of reviews, I've just read the back of the book to save me mindlessly trying to brainstorm what the piece is about. So I'll let the responsibility not bear on me this time. Isolated from society in a tenement basement in St. Petersburg, a malicious former civil servant vents his resentments. In the rambling notes that follow, we are exposed to the inner turmoil of the underground man, who represents the voice of his generation, an emotional, paranoid knot of contradictions. The spiteful narrator is also desperate to join a society he loathes, if only to prove his superiority to it. So yeah, this book contains the ramblings of an underground man, which is basically, well, the main character, he sort of says that he's an official of some sorts, and he's kind of reminiscing over his life barren from society or interaction. And yeah, it's philosophical ramblings mostly, but very, very meaningful philosophical ramblings. And the other half in itself is different to the first. And as you can imagine, this is naturally what brought me to want to read this book in the first place. And not only because I read this after Crime and Punishment a couple years ago, but it's obviously a classic piece of literature, Russian literature, which is even more ingratiating. But something I enjoy about Dostoevsky's work is that his characters are always in a state of internal conflict, psychological conflict. You saw this with White Knights, which I've reviewed, and Demons, the numerous amount of characters in that piece, and there are quite a lot of characters, maybe too much, but that's Dostoyevsky for you. Throughout this review, I'm going to talk a bit about what happens throughout the book, but mostly analysing the concepts and delving into the narrator's deliriousness, what he's saying through this mask of utter turmoil, I guess you could say. So yeah, this is going to be a juicy review, lots of philosophical ideas to get through. So mentioning that there's two parts to this piece. So the first part is obviously what I'm going to go through first, just to be helpful and chronological in my approach. So the first quote that took my attention is the sentence, or the few words that the underground man utters near the beginning, which is, to be too conscious is an illness. Now you can think yourself what that might mean, but it's obviously alluding to how awareness has its advantages, but we can't really escape awareness from being a double-edged sword. To add to this idea, I thought to add a reference to Friedrich Nietzsche, who in his Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he says, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. Now, I trust your mind is working very actively to interpret these words, and so I'll leave you to it. But I want to add my own personal interpretation as well. It seems that both Dostoyevsky and Nietzsche, therefore, understood that the higher the intelligence of an individual, now you can debate what intelligence implies, but let's just say the higher the awareness of the individual, let's say, the more likely they will be led to social seclusion, either by the choice of their own or by exile of others. So, of course, from the little blurb at the back, it's obvious that determinism and free will are heavily referenced throughout this piece, not only up front, but also in a form of symbolism. And the fundamental idea is that man wants freedom. The individual wants freedom. They yearn for freedom. But once they have it, they are unsatisfied. They are ungrateful for their values being met, for their aspirations being in control. Think of it this way. With too much order, we grow to want to just smash things up, to prove that something is not invincible. Order alone cannot kill us. It can only cripple our morale, I suppose you could say. It only drives us to insane boredom. But on the other hand, chaos, too much of chaos in itself can kill us. For example, we can die of stress, literally. We can die of a heart attack, for example. So too much chaos then, not only biologically, but mentally. Too much chaos is a killer of man. But you can't be killed by too much order. But the only difference is, chaos kills you, and with too much order, you self-destruct yourself. And just for reference, I don't think I'm going to read out the entire passage because it's about a page and a half. But I'd encourage you to look it up for yourself. It's when Dostoevsky, or the underground man, says, "Shower upon him every blessing," and so forth. In my copy, it is page 34 to 35, I mean. And I've got the Amazon Classics edition. But maybe I'll comment the maybe I'll comment the citation. I think I'll do that. But anyway, read that, because that is a key passage that I just got my previous point from. So yeah, read it for yourself and maybe reply to it and comment what you think. What's your interpretation? What could you add to what I've said? So moving on, because we have things to get through without making this video half an hour long, which is some of you might like, but generally I like to keep it maybe 20 minutes-ish. So yeah, there's a lot for you to look in the book for yourself. So in a way, I'm sort of just nudging you to go and read it for yourself in that regard, to interpret what is said as an individual and not just listening to me and maybe being led by my ideas alone. You should always read the text for yourself and see what you think. But here is another section from the second half, the first part of the second half, and let me just read it out for you, and then I'll discuss it. "I was standing by the billiard table, and in my ignorance, blocking up the way, and he wanted to pass. He took me by the shoulders, and without a word, without a warning or explanation, moved me from where I was standing to another spot, and passed by as though he had not noticed me. I could have forgiven blows, but I could not forgive his having moved me without noticing me." So in this second half, he's talking more about his friends, although they're more kind of associates, or well, less than that, I'd say. But yeah, he's kind of going outside. He's reminiscing about actually being above the ground, not being the underground man. And I suppose this is what led him to being the underground man in the first place. So, as we just saw with that reading, it has a tremendously brutal meaning as far as I'm concerned. Because this underground man, he would rather receive a beating from this other man than just be pushed aside and treated as if he was invisible. And this is where it sort of gets a bit satirical, because after this event, the underground man, he tries to set up the same situation again, but he's trying to build his confidence up in a way to like not be treated like just some kind of termite that can just be stepped on. And I think he must go through this process of walking down the side street at least a few times, and for the majority of them he just kind of falls, and even there's even one instance where he falls to the feet of the man because he's so afraid to just barge into him, he's afraid to meet the stranger head on, right? He's afraid of that because his confidence is so stricken. And one last time he manages to actually achieve his goal, and it kind of feels very unsatisfying to him once he does it, in the sense of, yes, he's very confident about him winning the fight, so to speak, but at the end of it, as a reader of the passage, you sort of feel like, what was the actual point of it? Like, what was he actually trying to achieve? It was more of this kind of personal goal that he was trying to pass or surpass for himself. And as a reader, you're just thinking like, okay, I mean, who cares? Because the underground man is saying, oh yes, I bet he's really annoyed about all this, and I bet he's crying in his sleep and so forth. But honestly, the other man couldn't care less, because it was only the underground man who was actually paying attention to how he was, so to speak, losing the encounter by being the one who moves aside in the scenario. And this is where it's so satirical. It's like this underground man is in such a delirious state about being shoved to one side instead of being the one who confronts the other head on and gets the other person to move out of the way. Now, I'm not dismissing the psychological importance of this, because if you're being barged the other way the entire time, obviously that's going to knock your self-confidence and you're going to feel like the termite that he does feel like. But again, it's just a very comedic sort of scenario with a serious, on the other side of that, a very serious psychological definition. Similar to a quote that I posted yesterday involving Friedrich Nietzsche, when I'm not going to quote actually what was said because it was a big paragraph of text, but essentially he was making the point that we should strive to, or at least we do inevitably, convert our suffering into a form of meaning. And obviously you might be thinking of Jordan Peterson or even stuff I've said before, because it's a very key idea with a lot of existential pieces. But this is sort of what the underground man was trying to achieve. He was fed up with being treated like a termite, being stepped on constantly, and as I said earlier, he would rather pursue being beaten to a pulp than being stepped on further. And even if this would lead to his suffering, immense suffering, physical pain, it would still mean more than if he didn't receive this beating. So this is where the themes of meaning come into this scenario. This is where the quote by Nietzsche comes in. Because the underground man would rather receive a beating than confirm his already established personal belief that he is equivalent to an ant. So the second part of the second half, it's slightly different. I mean, it follows the same feel as the first part of the second half, but it's sort of another narrative in itself. As I said, it kind of is, it kind of isn't. But a new character is introduced called Lisa, and the first time he meets her, he basically reminds her of her entire life goal, how it's just a waste of time, how this idea of a utopian ideal is so false, so superficial, and to follow this formula that society has given her on a plate is not only, as I mentioned, fake, but also an illusion. Because, as referred to before, it lacks the motion of her freedom, her individual freedom to choose what she wants. So in a way, she's just trying to follow a formula that she's been told her entire life. For example, marry a husband, marry a man and have a husband, to give birth. You know, all these sort of things that women are told that they should do, right? Especially when this book is set, which is the late 1800s, I believe. So he basically crumbles her entire belief system in this one sermon, as he puts it. He even puts it as a sermon. He's self-aware that he's kind of doing a sermon, and by the end of it, he apologizes because he himself knows that to expose somebody's entire plan for the future is almost like ripping their spine out, because it means that they have to start from square one. And this is kind of like what betrayal is, and why betrayal is so painful, because you think you know somebody, you think that you understand that they respect you, right? But when they betray you, it's like their entire archetype, your entire idea of them crumbles and everything comes into question. And the same thing happened for Lisa in this scenario. Everything that the underground man has said has shattered her entire foundation for living. And it's a very powerful passage. Very, very good. One small addition that I will make to that point is that even if she did achieve this life goal, this aspiration, even if it did come true, like what Littlefinger says in Game of Thrones, right? Let's just forget the last season because, yeah, it didn't exist, okay? Just a side note, let's just forget that last season. Anyway, like what Littlefinger says in Game of Thrones, it doesn't matter what we want, because when we get it, we just want something else. And that is the betrayal of life itself, as far as I'm concerned. Because even if we get what we think we want, we get bored of it. We like to think we're in control. We like to think that we have this will, this infinite will, that we can choose what we want, and that we are our own individual being. But I reject that idea. And so does Dostoevsky. It's a superficial idea in itself. And, you know, whether free will exists or not, that's for another video. And I've already talked about it a bit in other videos, which I can't remember exactly the videos. Maybe in Harari's book, Sapiens, perhaps, or Homo Deus, or 21 Lessons, I'm not sure. But I'm not going to go into whether free will exists or not, because that might be for another video entirely. Dostoevsky understands that free will is an illusion in many ways. And as well as this, he understands that this utopia that is promised to us by our government, by society, the ideals themselves are false, hypocritical, consumerist. And so that's the point that is being put across in this so ever brilliant passage with the underground man and Lisa. So I think I'm going to end it there. I want to encourage you to read the piece for yourself if you haven't already, or at least reread it if I've brought up anything that you didn't pick up on before. Because this book is small but full of ideas, and because it is so small, you can have quite fair confidence in reading it in at least one sitting. I read it in like 2 sittings, but as I said, I was sort of rushed for time. But I still picked up on the concepts, nevertheless. As I've mentioned in my other Dostoevsky reviews, though, even if this is short, all of his books are supposed to be reread and analysed, really. So, and I definitely picked up new things on my second reading. I plan to reread Crime and Punishment next, but I'm not sure when I'll do that. It probably won't be for another few months or a year. I'm not really sure, because it is a bit longer as a book. Stick around to see that video anyway. So, because I will definitely have a lot to say about that, because that is one of my favourite books, for sure. That is a mind-blowing book. As always, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you did genuinely like this review, and if you're not already subscribed to me, do consider it if you want to see more from me, or if you like my content. That will be very much appreciated. Be sure to check out the social media links in the description, and perhaps become a Patreon if you want to support me in my endeavour. But yeah, thank you so much once again, and I will see you very soon. Goodbye.